Ellery Queen were two cousins, and they very famously edited crime stories, wrote crime stories, and were a huge part of the crime scene in the early to the mid 20th century. One of them wrote about meeting Sherlock Holmes for the first time, and this is what I present to you today. I was 12 years old when my family moved to New York City. For a time, we lived with my grandfather in Brooklyn. It was my grandfather's house, only a few weeks after my arrival in fabulous New York, that I met Sherlock Holmes. Oh, unforgettable day. I was ill in bed. In those days, I was afflicted periodically with an abscess of the left ear. It came year after year with almost astronomical regularity, and always, I remember, during the week of school exams. My grandfather had an old turnip of a watch that I used to place flat against my left ear, and it always astounded him that even after the ordeal of having my ear lanced, I couldn't hear his Big Ben tick. I was lying in bed, a miserable youngster, on such a day as Dr. Watson has often described, a bleak and windy day with the fingers of winter scratching at the window pane. One of my aunts walked in and handed me a book she'd borrowed at the nearby public library. It was The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I opened the book with no realization that I stood, rather I sat, on the brink of my fate. I had no inkling, no premonition that in another minute my life's work, such as it is, would be born. My first glance was disheartening. I saw the frontispiece of the Harper edition, a picture of a rather innocuous man in dress coat and striped trousers holding the arm of a young woman in bridal gown. A love story, I said to myself, for surely this unattractive couple were in a church about to get married. The quotation under the illustration, "The gentleman in the pew handed it up to her," was not encouraging. In fact, there was nothing in that ill-chosen frontispiece by Sidney Paget to make a 12-year-old boy sit up and take notice, especially with his left ear in agony. Only an unknown and unknowable sixth sense prompted me to turn to the table of contents, and then the world brightened. The first story, A Scandal in Bohemia, seemed to hold little red-blooded promise, but the next story was, and always will be, a milestone. A strange rushing thrill challenged the pain in my ear. The Red-Headed League. What a combination of simple words to skewer themselves into the brain of a hungry boy. I glanced down quickly. The man with the twisted lip, The Adventure of the Speckled Band, and I was lost. Ecstatically, everlastingly lost. I started the first page of A Scandal in Bohemia, and truly, the game was afoot. The unbearable pain in my ear vanished. The abyss of melancholy into which only a 12-year-old boy can sink to, forgotten. I finished the adventures that night. I wasn't sad, I was glad. It wasn't the end, it was the beginning. I had knocked fearlessly on the door of a new world, and I had been admitted. There was a long road ahead, even longer than I dreamed. That night, as I closed the book, I knew that I had read one of the greatest books ever written, and today I realised with amazement how true and tempered was my 12-year-old critical sense. For in the mature smugness of my present literary judgment, I still feel unalterably that The Adventures is one of the world's masterpieces. I could not have slept much that night. If I did, I merely passed from one dream world to another, with the waking dream infinitely more wondrous. I remember when morning came, how symbolically the sun shone past my window. I leapt from bed, dressed, and with a great wad of yellow-stained cotton still in my ear, stole out of the house. As if by instinct, I knew where the public library was. Of course, it wasn't open, but I sat on the steps and waited. And though I waited hours, it seemed only minutes until a prim old lady came and unlocked the front door. But alas, I had no card. Yes, I might fill in this form, take it home, have my parents sign it, and then, after 3 days, 3 days, 3 eternities, I could call and pick up my card. I begged, I pleaded, I implored, and there must have been something irresistible in my voice and in my eyes. Thank you now, Miss Librarian of those days. Those thanks are long overdue, for that gentle-hearted old lady, she broke all the rules of librarydom and gave me a card, and told me, with a twinkle in her eyes, where I could find books by a man named Doyle. I rushed to the stacks. My first reaction was one of horrible and devastating disappointment. Yes, there were books by Doyle on the shelves, but so few of them. I had expected a whole library full, rows and rows of Sherlock, all waiting patiently for my coming of age. I found 3 precious volumes. I bundled them under my arm, had them stamped, and fled home. Back in bed, I started to read A Study in Scarlet, the memoirs with a frontispiece that almost frightened me to death, and The Hound of the Baskervilles. They were food and drink and medicine, and all the Queen's horses and all the Queen's men couldn't put Ellery together again. But my doom had been signed, sealed, and delivered in The Adventures. The books which followed merely broadened the picture, filled in the indelible details. That tall, excessively lean man, his thin, razor-like face and hawk bill of a nose, the curved pipe, the dressing gown, the way he paced up and down the room quickly, eagerly, his head sunk upon his chest, the way he examined the scene of a crime on all fours, his nose to the ground, the gaunt, dynamic figure and his incisive speech, the gasogene, the Persian slipper, the coal scuttle for the cigars, the bullet pocks on the wall, the scraping violin, the hypodermic syringe. What a shock for my fledgling sensibilities. The ghostly hansom cab, with a 12-year-old boy clinging by some miracle of literary gymnastics to its back as it rattled off through the mist and the fog. Reader, I had met Sherlock Holmes. The end. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.